Alright, hey folks, well, welcome back to the channel. Eric the Old Jarhead here. I wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, this Vevor planer behind me. I did a review video on it recently and a couple mentioned some things about Vevor that I don't know. Now I wanted to talk very briefly before I get into today's video about this planer and a few thoughts that I have. First of all, I'm not endorsing anyone. So one of you commented, why am I endorsing Vevor? I'm not. I'm not endorsing anyone. Vevor sent me the planer so that I could check it out and give you my thoughts on it, which is what I did. I would like to follow up a little bit with a couple things that I've noticed with this planer since I started using it. So first of all, do I think it's a good planer for the money? Sure. I mean, $312 is, I don't think you can get a less expensive planer. And it's absolutely knocking down some pine for me. I've gone through about close to 2 dozen boards with it, and I did some Brazilian cherry. Just one piece so far, but I planed that Brazilian cherry, which is really, really hard. Now I've also got some black locust to do, some black walnut, some English walnut, so I'm gonna push this planer. I have noticed a couple things. One of you commented that you had trouble with the motor burned up, and Vevor hasn't replaced it yet for you. I did notice that if the planer is left on the speed setting 2, which is the higher speed setting, and you try to plane 12-inch old blue stained super dry pine, it slows down a lot, and you've got to take less out per bite as you're going through it. That's pretty normal for any planer though, except for maybe the big industrial planers. But like the old Ryobi, same thing. You can't just push everything through it at the same speed. So if you're doing something really hard, like the Brazilian cherry, then you've got to slow down and you've got to take less. Maybe only a 32nd of an inch or a 64th. You're certainly not going to be taking a 16th out every cut on something like that. And I did find with the really wide pine, 12 and a half, pushing 13-inch stuff that I've got that's really dry, very old, it definitely slowed down. Then I realized I was on that number 2 speed setting, and trust me, the motor was starting to smell. I knew I was pushing it. I backed it off to that first setting, which is a slower setting, and things definitely improved. So the first thing I would say is if you've got one of these, don't try to plane really wide boards or really hard boards on that number 2 speed setting. It's faster, that's great, but for this wide stuff, you gotta slow down and let the planer do its work. So it did actually a really nice job on that Brazilian cherry. That stuff is rock hard, folks, but it went slow. And I think it's possible it could be slower than the old Ryobi. I may have to put the old Ryobi back up and try it out, but it seemed like it might be a little slower when it was into the really wide stuff and the really hard cherry. Now, doing pine, I think it will do 6, 8, 10-inch pine all day long without batting an eye. Is it going to do 12-inch pine all day long? If it's fairly fresh, you milled it 2 or 3 months ago, I think it'd be fine. If you did something that was 2 or 3 years ago and it's about 7% in moisture content, will it do it all day long? I don't know yet. I think it will. But you're going to go slow. That's just the way it's going to be. So that's number 1. Number 2, the exhaust port is 2 inches. Now, just like the Ryobi, when I tried to put my adapters on there, they did not fit properly. I have the same problem with the Ryobi, so I had to use a chunk of the 2-inch hose from my Rigid shop vac. I don't use that old hose anymore because I've got a dust deputy on my Rigid shop vac, which happens to be right behind you. So I cut a chunk off and I used it to go from the old Ryobi planer to the 2-inch adapter to the 4-inch to run up to my dust collection system. Well, with Vevor, I'm doing the same thing. I had to put some extra duct tape on it, put that adapter in, duct tape it all together. I don't know why companies do this. I don't know if it's Chinese companies. I'm assuming Ryobi's made there. But for anybody making a planer, put a 4-inch dust collection port on it and be done with this 2-inch crap. It doesn't work, and you can net to 4-inch down to 2-inch for your shop vac, if that's what you gotta do. But putting these out like this, you put out so much sawdust, you need to have 4-inch collection. Now, perhaps I'm pushing these planers way beyond what anybody else would do. And I suspect that's probably the truth. Because how many people buy a $300, and in my case, several years ago, a $200 or $250 planer, and then plane every last board for the interior of their cabin, including the flooring, and trim boards, and stairs, and all kinds of things, and then a customer's cabin, and then more stuff for my own cabin, and stuff around the house here. I have used that planer way beyond anything they probably intended for it. I suspect that this Vevor is not really intended for somebody who really needs a, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 planer, maybe more. Now, is the DeWalt better built? Well, I haven't used one, but I've used DeWalt tools in the past. I don't think they're any better than Ryobi, frankly. Maybe they are a little bit. I'd have to use one. So DeWalt, if you're watching, fine. Send me a planer and let me see if $550 for your planer is really worth it. Because that's more than $200 more than either of these. And if you're a guy that really can't afford a lot, maybe you're retired and you bought a lot of tools already and you can't afford to go out and spend $600 on a planer, well, $300 ain't quite that bad. And if it'll do the job for you, maybe it'll do the job. So, anyway, the other two issues I've had with the Vevor so far is that sometimes when doing heavy planing, this crank can start to back off a little bit. It gets a little loose. It's not really loose right now compared to the way it was, but it seems like it might vibrate up or down a little bit. So it's almost as if you set it at, say, 3/4 of an inch and you're planing Brazilian cherry, which is rock hard, it seems like it starts to back off a little bit halfway through the cut. So I did start holding on to it just to see, is this thing moving on me? I mean, it looked like it had been moving. So I do think if it's vibrating and it's working hard, that may back off. If it does, then this planer's no good. And I will find out and I will tell you. But you cannot have a planer depth adjust in the cut. If you set it at 3/4 of an inch and you finished at 7/8 of an inch, well, you've got a wedge, not a 3/4 of an inch board. So has it done that yet? No. So far, I haven't noticed a difference in the thickness of the boards that are coming out. That's something I gotta watch. And the last thing that I've got for this thing is that the scale is 1/10 of an inch. Now, I did put that comment in my last video. That really kind of ticks me off. So, again, I do think that it's a decent planer so far. I mean, for $300, folks, it's an inexpensive planer that could do the job for somebody who can't really afford twice that, but needs to plane a bunch of 6-inch pine for a cabin build or something like that, or for very light use around a hobby shop. Could this do it? Sure it could. And you're saving a couple, $200, $300 by buying it. However, I don't know why these companies, and Vevor, I hope you're watching this, do not put an inch scale in 1/10 of an inch. We don't use metric here in America. We use inches, standard measurements. That's, 64th, 32nd, 16th, 1/8 of an inch. We don't build in 1/10 of an inch. I don't know anybody that does. And I am 58 years old. You don't build in 1/10 of an inch. So, Vevor, fix that crap. Right? Now, I'm getting riled up here. But the reality, folks, is that we as YouTubers bear, I think, a responsibility to be honest with you. So in my last review, I told you what I thought and I was honest about it. In this video, I've had a chance to use this planer some more. I just put 20 boards through it. I'll show them to you. They look pretty good. It definitely is planing smoothly. It seems to be working quite well, other than those things that I just mentioned. Now, I can probably get a new scale and glue it on there, one that's in 1/16 of an inch. So Vevor, send me one and fix it for future builds, because that will upset people. Because what's going to happen is they're not going to realize it's in 1/10 of an inch, because everything else we do will be in 1/8 of an inch. So they'll go from 1 inch in measurement, they'll come down 1 notch, which should be 1/8 of an inch, and think they've got 7/8. Well, they don't. Now, the Ryobi I did show in my last video, it's in 1/16 of an inch, and I think that's what this scale should be in. you're not going to plane an 1/8 of an inch at a time. At most, you're going to plane a 1/16 at a time in softwoods. More likely a 32nd, but you don't need the 32nd measurement. Well, one last thing I thought I might mention too is that on the Ryobi, it seemed pretty easy to know where my starting point was. On the Vevor, there's no marks up here on top. So I just look on the scale, figure out my starting point, and away you go. I like to have some kind of a mark up here. It just kind of helps keep track of things, but it's not that big a deal. We can live without it. While I'm at it, check this video out while you're waiting. Maybe you haven't seen it. And y'all have a great day. The Old Jarhead out.